You are allowed to be here. Not once you have finished something, not after you have earned it, not when you have resolved the thing that is sitting unresolved in the back of your mind. Right now, exactly as you are, in the middle of whatever remains undone, you are allowed to be here. Feel the bed beneath you. It is holding you without requiring anything. It does not know your to-do list. It does not know what did not get finished today. It simply holds. That is what it does. And tonight, that is also what you are going to practice. Just being held. Just being here. Let your breathing find its own pace. You do not need to manage it. Your body knows how to breathe without your help. It has been doing it all day, quietly and competently, while you were busy attending to everything else. Let it do what it knows to do. Let your hands open. Let your face soften. The expression you have been wearing all day, the look of readiness and alertness and managed composure, it can come down now. There is no one to hold it for. The room is dark. The house is quiet. This is the one place and the one time where nothing is asked of your face, your posture, your presence. If something is nudging at you right now, some task, some worry, some item from the list that has decided this is the moment, just notice it. You do not have to fix it. You do not have to chase it or argue with it or promise it you will get to it tomorrow. Just let it be there, at the edge of your attention, without pulling you all the way in. You are not going to solve it tonight, and you are not supposed to. Tonight belongs to this, to the breath, to the dark, to the quiet and extraordinary act of letting yourself rest. That is what we are here to talk about tonight. Rest, and the strange, pervasive, very modern difficulty of allowing it without guilt. Because something has gone wrong with the way most people understand rest. Something in the culture we live in has produced a strange situation. In the stories we absorbed about what a good life looks like, about what a good person does with their hours, rest was never quite included. Millions of people lie down at the end of a day and immediately feel that they should not be lying down, that the lying down is a kind of failure, that the people who are succeeding are still awake, still working, still moving toward something while they are here in the dark, falling behind. Tonight, we are going to look at where that feeling comes from, and we are going to let it go. There is a story the modern world tells about rest. It goes like this. Rest is what you earn by working. It is the reward at the end of the effort. It is what you get when you have done enough. And since there is always, in the logic of this story, more that could be done, rest is always slightly premature, always a little ahead of where you should be in the earning. The deadline is not quite finished. The inbox is not quite empty. The project is not quite there. The version of yourself you are trying to become is not quite achieved. And so the rest, when it comes, carries with it the sensation of having left something unfinished. which is to say, it carries guilt. This story is so widespread, so thoroughly embedded in the assumptions of how we talk about time, productivity, self-worth, that most people do not even recognize it as a story. They experience it as a fact. Of course, rest must be earned. Of course, stillness without accomplishment is laziness. Of course, the person who rests when there is still work to be done is falling behind the person who does not. These feel like obvious truths about how things work, but they are not truths. They are beliefs. They are specific, historically contingent beliefs. They were constructed in a particular time and place. They have been handed down with enough repetition and reinforcement that they have acquired the texture of reality. Where did they come from? Pause. The story has many origins, but one of the clearest runs through the industrial era and the particular moral framework that grew up around it. When work became something you left home to do, the factory whistle defined the beginning and end of the productive day. Time became divisible into working time and not working time. And in the moral vocabulary of that era, influenced heavily by religious frameworks that associated idleness with sin and industry with virtue, not working time required justification. Rest was acceptable if it served the purpose of restoring the body to productive capacity. Sleep was acceptable because it made you functional tomorrow. Leisure was tolerable if it recharged you for more work. But rest for its own sake, stillness for the simple reason that a person had a right to be still, that was morally suspect. That was idleness, and idleness was a failing. We have inherited this framework almost entirely intact. The specific religious language has largely dropped away, but the underlying moral structure remains. We feel virtuous when we are productive. We feel vaguely guilty when we are not. The person who works long hours is admired. The person who guards their rest is described as someone who lacks ambition. The language of hustle and grind, the exaltation of people who sleep only a few hours a night, all of this is the old moral framework in modern dress, as if sleep deprivation were a kind of achievement. It speaks through the vocabulary of productivity culture rather than religious obligation. But the essential message is the same. Your worth is measured in your output, and stillness is a deficit in the accounting. And the social performance of busyness has made this worse. At some point in recent decades, busyness became a status signal. Being overwhelmed became something people said with a particular tone that was not quite complaint and not quite boast, but somewhere in between. Being busy came to mean being important, being needed, being someone whose time is so in demand that there is never enough of it. And the person who admitted to having time, who confessed to an afternoon of doing nothing in particular, risked an implicit judgment that their time was somehow less valuable, that they were somehow less central to the workings of the world. And so people began performing busyness even when they were not, filling the gaps with the language of overwhelm, wearing exhaustion as a credential, and rest as something you admitted to quietly, if at all. And then the technology arrived, and with it, the final collapse of any natural boundary between working time and not working time. The phone, the notification, the inbox that follows you into the bedroom, the bathroom, the holiday, the dinner table, the moment just before sleep, the message that arrives at 11 at night and sits there, its presence alone exerting a kind of gravitational pull, even if you do not open it. The always-on culture that transformed rest from an accepted rhythm of human life into a kind of personal choice that had to be actively defended against a constant alternative. For most of human history, the night provided a natural enforcement mechanism. When the sun went down, you could not see to work. The darkness imposed rest, whether or not you felt you had earned it. The body's tiredness and the world's darkness worked together to end the day and begin the restoration. That mechanism is gone. The light is always on. The work is always accessible. And so the rest must now be chosen, consciously, against the continuous availability of something else. And for a person who has internalized the belief that rest must be earned, choosing rest in the face of work that could be done is not relaxation. It is a moral transgression. The guilt is not irrational. It is the entirely predictable output of a set of beliefs applied to a set of circumstances. The beliefs say working is virtue and resting is its absence. The circumstances say work is always available. The output is rest is always slightly illegitimate. You are always a little bit in the wrong when you choose it. And so you lie down at the end of the day and the guilt settles in alongside you. Instead of resting, you spend the first hour running the day's accounting in your head. What should be recovery becomes a ledger review. Did I do enough? What did I miss? What is waiting tomorrow? Will I be behind? Is someone else ahead? Could I have used this time differently? And here is the deeply cruel irony of this. The guilt that is supposed to motivate more work actually prevents the restoration that would make more work possible. The mind that cannot rest does not restore. It cycles. It replays and rehearses and worries without resolving anything, because there is nothing to resolve at 11 at night in a dark room. And the person who emerges from a night of guilty non-rest is not sharper or more productive than the person who simply allowed themselves to sleep. They are not faster, more reactive, less capable of the deep thinking that actually produces good work. It is worth noting, simply because it helps to see the water you swim in, that not all cultures have arrived at the same relationship with rest. In much of southern Europe, the afternoon pause is not a personal indulgence, but a structural feature of the day. It is an acknowledgement woven into the social architecture. Human beings are not designed for uninterrupted output across 12 or 14 hours. In Japan, there is a concept called ma, which translates roughly as negative space or the pregnant pause. The idea is that the silence between notes is as much a part of the music as the notes themselves. The interval, the space, the rest, has its own meaning and value that is not reducible to absence. In the Netherlands, there is a practice called niksen, deliberate idleness, doing nothing with intention, without the guilt that a direct translation would attract in English. These are not primitive holdovers from less productive eras. They are different solutions to the same question of how human beings sustain themselves over a lifetime of effort. And the evidence across cultures and across research is increasingly clear. The people and communities who protect rest are not falling behind the ones who do not. They are lasting longer, thinking more clearly, caring more deeply, and arriving at the end of their lives with a sense of having been more fully present for them. And the evidence for this is not merely intuitive. We now understand, at a neurological level, what sleep actually does. During deep sleep, the brain's glymphatic system activates and clears the metabolic waste that accumulates during waking hours, the literal biochemical byproduct of thinking and processing. The pruning of unused neural connections that allows learning to consolidate into something lasting happens during sleep. The emotional integration of difficult experiences happens during sleep. The raw charge of what happened today becomes the more settled memory of what happened last week. That transformation requires the sleep hours to complete. What is more, sleep deprivation produces a specific cognitive blind spot. The sleep-deprived person perceives their own performance as largely unaffected, while it is measurably declining. The depletion is real. The awareness of the depletion is impaired, which means the person running on insufficient sleep not only performs worse, but they are the last to know it. The confident feeling of keeping up is itself a symptom of the deficit they are too under-rested to recognize. But this is not actually about productivity. This is something more fundamental than that. The argument that rest makes you more productive, while true, concedes too much to the framework that made the guilt necessary in the first place. It says, you may rest because it will make your work better. It does not say, you may rest because you are a living creature. It does not say that living creatures require rest as a basic fact of their existence, not as a strategy for optimizing output, simply as a requirement of what they are. A tree does not go dormant in winter because dormancy makes its spring growth more productive. A bear does not hibernate because the data shows hibernation improves its summer performance metrics. A tide does not recede because receding makes the next wave more powerful. These are not strategies. They're simply what living things do. They move and they rest. They expand and they contract. They engage and they withdraw. The rest is not the enemy of the aliveness. The rest is part of the aliveness. It is the other half of the cycle that the aliveness requires in order to continue being what it is. You are a living thing. You are not a machine that runs on fuel and produces output. You are a creature with rhythms, and one of those rhythms is rest. Not rest as reward, not rest as recovery strategy. Rest as a fundamental requirement of what you are. Rest as the night to the day. Rest as the winter to the summer. Rest as something you are entitled to, not because you earned it, but because you are alive. And alive things rest. The brain itself understands this. Your mind does not operate in a single continuous mode. It oscillates across the day between two fundamentally different states of activity. The focused, task-directed attention you use when concentrating on a problem uses different neural networks, different from the open, wandering attention you use when you step back and let the mind move freely. And neuroscience has shown us something that feels almost counterintuitive. The wandering network activates when you give the mind permission to roam without direction. It is where the deepest integrative work happens, the unexpected connections between ideas, the synthesis that was not available when you were pushing, the insight that arrives, fully formed, in the shower or on a walk or in the last moments before sleep, when you stopped trying. This is not accidental. It is the other mode of cognition doing what it is built to do, and it requires the directed mode to stand down, which means the pauses, the gaps, the moments of apparent doing nothing are not the absence of thinking. They are a different kind of thinking. One that cannot happen when every moment is filled with the first kind. The rest is not the interruption of the mind. The rest is the mind doing something the busyness cannot do. Think about what guilt rest looks like. Not the kind of exhaustion that overwhelms everything and simply takes you under, but the ordinary daily experience of trying to rest while the guilt runs alongside it. You might recognize it. It looks like the Sunday that never quite arrives. Sunday is technically a day off. The calendar is clear. The obligation structure has released you for these hours. And yet the Sunday does not feel free. It feels, from the moment you wake, like a problem to be solved, like time that is at risk of being wasted, like a resource you are already, before you have done anything, slightly mismanaging. So you do things. Not because you need to, not because you want to, but because doing things is the only form of Sunday that does not feel like a failure. You rearrange something. You plan something. You clean something that did not need cleaning. You make a list. You do the errand that could have waited. And by the time Sunday evening arrives, the day has technically been filled. But something about it feels like it was never quite yours, like you passed through it rather than inhabiting it, like you were in the room but not in the day. And the weariness you feel on Sunday night is not the earned tiredness of meaningful effort. It is the particular exhaustion of a person who spent their rest time pretending not to need it. It looks like the holiday that the body attends while the mind stays at the desk. You have traveled somewhere. The place is genuinely beautiful. People who love you are nearby. And yet there is a low-grade absence you cannot quite name. A sense of being partially elsewhere, of running a background process that does not stop because the geography changed. You find yourself checking the phone at moments you told yourself you would not. You feel the slight pull of what is happening without you at work, the conversations you are not part of, the decisions being made in your absence. The holiday is beautiful, and you are glad you came, and something in you cannot fully land. The most honest version of the experience is that your body took the holiday, and your mind took next week's work along for the ride. It looks like the evening that becomes pseudo-rest. You are not working, technically. You are on the couch. You are watching something. But the phone is in your hand, and the watching is more like the backdrop to a continuous low-intensity scroll, an alternating stream of content that never quite satisfies, never quite disengages, keeping the mind in a state of low alertness that is neither working nor resting. It is not the rich stillness of genuine rest. It is not the productive absorption of meaningful work. It is a kind of third state, a form of distraction that passes the time without restoring anything. It delivers you to bedtime feeling tired but not rested, spent but not fulfilled, as if you used the evening without actually being in it. It looks like the body's signals being ignored. The body has a very clear vocabulary for tiredness, the heavy eyelids, the dulling of focus, the physical desire to be horizontal, the yawn that signals a shift in the nervous system from alertness to readiness for sleep. These signals are remarkably precise and remarkably consistent. They are the body communicating, through biology rather than language, that the time for rest has arrived. And the person who has internalized the guilt of rest has learnt to override these signals with a reliability that would be impressive if it were not so damaging. Not yet. Just finish this one thing. Just get through this part. The signals are overridden because responding to them feels like surrender, like admitting to a need that should have been conquered. And so the window of easy sleep closes, the body shifts into its normal cortisol response. What would have been a gentle drift into rest becomes a long negotiation with a mind that is now wired and unsure why. It looks like the bedtime review. You are in bed, in the dark, and instead of drifting towards sleep, you find yourself conducting a systematic audit of the day. You replay conversations, scanning for the moment where you might have said the wrong thing. You run through the list of what did not get done. You project forward into tomorrow's problems. You calculate whether you are ahead or behind some internal schedule you have set for yourself, some version of where you should be by now. You compare against where you actually are and find the gap. This is not thinking. This is not planning. This is the guilty mind refusing to let the day close, because closing the day feels like accepting its imperfections. The review accomplishes nothing except keeping you from the sleep that would actually prepare you for tomorrow better than any amount of reviewing ever could. And it looks like the particular version of inadequacy that arrives. You see, at the edge of the scrolling you are doing instead of sleeping, evidence of other people's productivity, the person sharing their early morning routine, the person describing their weekend output with the particular energy of someone performing discipline for an audience, the person who seems, from the outside, to have found the secret of maximizing every available hour. You are here in the dark, wondering if the evening you just had was spent correctly. The comparison trap in rest works the same way the comparison trap works everywhere else. You are comparing your private interior experience to someone else's curated public presentation. You are comparing your unfiltered knowledge of your own ambivalence, your tiredness, your small failures of follow-through, to their highlight reel. You do not see their rest. You do not see the Sunday afternoon they spent in the same unproductive blur you were judging yourself for. You see only the version they have chosen to make visible, which is not representative of the whole, and was not designed to be. The comparison is structurally unfair, and the inadequacy it produces is real but not earned. It is the predictable output of a rigged comparison. You are not behind the people whose curated productivity you are scrolling past at midnight. You are a tired person looking at other tired people's best moments. And the most useful thing you can do right now, for yourself and for tomorrow, is to put the phone down and rest. All of this lives in the body, not as a metaphor, but as a daily physical fact. The inability to rest is not only a mental event, it is something the body enacts continuously in the specific texture of its held and readied state. Feel your chest right now. Is it open or is it slightly narrowed, the way a chest narrows when it is braced for something? Feel your belly, the soft center of you that tends to tighten when the tightening has become habitual. Feel the muscles along your spine, whether they are resting or still doing the quiet, invisible work of keeping you upright, against a threat that is not in the room, a threat the body is not quite convinced has left. The chronic low-level arousal that comes from never fully resting accumulates in the body the way sediment accumulates at the bottom of a river. Slowly, without announcement, without a single visible event you could point to. Day after day, the muscles do not fully release because the mind is not fully off. Day after day, the nervous system stays in its ready state, past the point when readiness is required. And the body that carries this accumulated non-rest begins to register a tiredness that sleep alone does not resolve. A weariness not just about last night, but about all the nights before it. The nights in which the rest was partial and the permission was withheld. The body has a long memory, and the first real rest, the genuinely permitted rest, often brings with it a depth of tiredness that seems to come from further back than just today. Because it does. It comes from all the days you kept going past the moment when stopping was what was needed. This is not a problem to solve tonight. This is simply information. The body telling you, in the only language it has, how much it has been carrying, and how glad it is to finally be heard. And perhaps most recognizably, guilt rest looks like being the most conscientious person in the room, and also the most depleted. Here is the irony that the guilt around rest produces. The people who feel it most acutely are almost never the people who actually need to work harder. They are the people who care the most, the people for whom the work matters, the relationships matter, the outcomes matter. The people who are not cutting corners and not neglecting things, and who are, if anything, giving more than the situation strictly requires. These are the people most susceptible to the guilt, because they are the people whose investment makes them unable to trust that enough is enough. And so they push past the signals, push past the tiredness. They push past the moment when the marginal productivity of an additional hour has gone negative. The work is getting worse rather than better. They keep going because stopping feels like it means they do not care enough. And slowly, invisibly, the depletion accumulates until the care itself begins to suffer. The thing they were trying to protect by not stopping is damaged by the not stopping. The care and the depletion work against each other, and the only thing that resolves this is the rest that the guilt has been preventing. Her name for tonight is Claire. She was 34 years old and had, by the measure of almost every external standard she had been raised to respect, built a life that was going well. She had a career she had worked for steadily, and which had rewarded that work with the promotions and recognition that confirmed she was on the right track. She had a partner who loved her. She had a home she had made into something she was proud of. She had friends she did not see nearly as often as she would have liked. The life she had built left less room for the unscheduled than she had expected when she was building it. What she did not have was the ability to be still. Not for any meaningful length of time. Not without manufacturing something to do within the stillness. On weeknights, she worked until the working became untenable, and then moved to a gentler form of productivity, the organizing, the planning, the preparing for tomorrow. On weekends, she kept a mental list of the things the weekend was supposed to accomplish. She moved through that list with the same systematic intent she brought to the work week. By Sunday evening, she could account for where the time had gone and know it had not been wasted. She was not unhappy. She was too busy to be unhappy. She was tired in a way that had become so constant and unremarkable that she no longer noticed it as a condition. She simply moved through it. The way you move through weather you have forgotten you can seek shelter from. One August, her company had a forced shutdown. 2 weeks. Everyone off. No access to the work systems. She had not had 2 consecutive weeks of nothing required of her since before she started working, which was 15 years ago. She did not know what to do with it. The first week, she cleaned the apartment more thoroughly than it had ever been cleaned. She organized things that did not need organizing. She made elaborate plans for projects she had been meaning to get to. She stayed in a state of busy that was indistinguishable from her normal state, except that the busyness had no stakes and no deadline. When she was honest with herself, it was a form of elaborate avoidance. She was keeping herself from something. She could feel it at the edge of the activity. A kind of formless, uncomfortable quiet that was waiting for her if she stopped moving. She recognized this quality of avoidance distantly as something she had been practicing for years without giving it a name. The busyness was not just productivity. It was a fence she had built around a silence she did not know how to be with. And the fence had become so habitual, so automatic, that she had stopped noticing it was a fence. She experienced it simply as the appropriate way to use time, as character, as the natural expression of a person who was serious about her life. In the second week, she ran out of things to manufacture. On a Tuesday morning, she sat down on her couch with no particular intention, and she stayed there. She did not get up to do something. She did not pick up her phone. She sat with the sunlight moving across the floor and the sounds of the street below, and whatever was happening inside her, which turned out to be quite a lot. She did not expect the guilt to be overwhelming. It was there at first, the familiar sense of falling behind, of wasting time, of being the person on the couch while other people were moving forward. But it was quieter than expected, and underneath it, barely audible at first, was something else. A kind of tiredness so deep it felt like it had been waiting for permission for years. A relief so large it was almost frightening. The body, finally permitted to be still, was being still with an urgency that surprised her. She did not feel lazy. She felt, sitting on that couch in the Tuesday morning light, like someone who had just been allowed to put down something very heavy, something they had been carrying for so long they had forgotten it was in their hands. She cried, eventually. Just not dramatically, just the quiet tears that come when something that has been held very tightly is finally allowed to loosen. She did not entirely know what she was crying about. She thought it might be relief. She thought it might be grief for all the Tuesdays she had not let herself be this still. She thought it might simply be the body doing what bodies do when they finally feel safe enough, when the vigilance they have been maintaining without anyone asking them to is finally allowed to release. She did not transform overnight. The 2 weeks ended and she went back to work and the busyness resumed its familiar patterns. But something had shifted, quietly and permanently, in the way she understood stillness. She had felt what genuine rest felt like after years of pseudo-rest, and it was different enough from what she had been doing to constitute a separate experience. She began, slowly and with effort, and with many reversions, to protect small pockets of real stillness in her weeks. Not every day, but often enough. The Tuesday morning on the couch became a reference point she could return to in her mind when the guilt started up. She knew now what she was defending. She had felt it. And what she had felt was not laziness. What she had felt was herself, simply here, without agenda, discovering that this was profound. This was, in fact, quite a lot. The work she brought to the days that followed real rest was different from the work she brought from depletion. Not louder or more impressive, just more genuinely hers, more rooted in something actual, less defended and less manufactured. The rest had not stolen from the work. The rest had quietly given it back to her. His name for tonight is Marcus. He was 41, and he had spent the previous decade building a version of himself he was genuinely proud of. He had gotten sober in his early 30s after years of using busyness and achievement as a way of not feeling what he did not want to feel. Then he discovered that the busyness itself had become its own form of not feeling. He had done the work of sobriety seriously and well. In the decades since, he had built a consulting practice, a rich and hard-won set of relationships, and what he would have described as a meaningful life. He slept 4 hours a night, most nights. He said this with a kind of pride that he had learned over years of paying close attention to himself to recognize as a warning sign. Pride in deprivation. He had internalized the culture's most punishing message about rest, that the person who needs less sleep is stronger, more serious about the work, more committed to the outcomes, that requiring 8 hours was a kind of weakness. He wore the 4 hours as a credential. He was someone who did not waste time on sleep. The people around him in the early mornings felt like confirmation. The ones who had sent emails at 6 and were already several moves ahead before most people had breakfast, they confirmed this was the correct way to be serious about a life. He had built a culture around himself of similar people, and they reinforced each other with the language of relentlessness. They talked about rest the way athletes talk about weakness, as something that others need, but that the serious ones have learned to override. He was proud to be among the serious ones. He did not see the cost accumulating. He had stopped being able to see it, which was itself one of the costs. He collapsed in his office on a Wednesday morning in November. Not a dramatic medical emergency, but a sudden and complete failure of a system that had been running on insufficient resources for longer than it could sustain. He sat in his chair and was unable to stand. He felt underneath the immediate alarm something he could only later describe as a cellular rebellion, the body refusing to go further until the terms of the agreement were renegotiated. He went home. He slept. Not 4 hours, 9 hours that night, and 8 the next, and 10 the night after. And in the days around that sleeping, he was almost incapable of anything else. He ate. He watched the wall. He walked around the block once and was tired by the time he returned. His body was reclaiming, with an urgency that admitted no argument, what it had been owed for a very long time. What surprised him was not the tiredness. He had expected that. What surprised him was the quality of thinking that happened in the stillness. He had believed for a decade that his best thinking happened in motion, in the flow of working and producing and responding. But in the forced quiet of those days, with the urgency removed and the performance nowhere to be found, he discovered a different kind of thinking. Slower, more honest, less interested in the next move, and more interested in questions he had not sat with for years. Not problems to solve, but truths to acknowledge about what he was doing and why, about the things he had been too busy to feel for so long that he had almost forgotten they were there. In the rest, he encountered himself in a way that the continuous motion had made impossible. He had discovered that underneath the always moving, always producing self was a quieter self that had been waiting without complaint, sustained by the belief that there would eventually be time for it. In the stillness, he made that time. It was not empty time. It was the fullest time he had allowed himself in years, and in it he found a kind of clarity that only arrives when you stop moving fast enough for things to catch up with you. Some of what he had been building toward was not actually what he wanted, that some of what he had been running from had, in the running, been turned into the pace itself. He returned to work changed, not because the rest had made him more productive, though it did, but because in the rest he had found something the production, however successful, had not been able to give him. The 4 hours he had worn as a credential was not an achievement. It was a wound, and wounds are not credentials. They are just wounds, and they heal when you finally give them what they have been asking for. Nature does not produce guilt about rest. The natural world is the largest available evidence base for how living systems actually function. And in the natural world, rest is not an aberration. Rest is structural. It is built into every biological system that has ever been observed. The seed sleeps in the ground through winter, not because it is lazy, because it is timing itself to conditions. It is gathering, in the stillness, what it needs to become what it is trying to become. The soil rests between growing seasons. The farmer who has understood this has learned to let a field lie fallow, to give it the dormancy that restores its capacity to produce. The field that is planted in without rest depletes. The depleted field does not produce a smaller crop. It produces a diminished one year after year, until the depletion becomes visible in everything it grows. It needs its winter. You need yours. The ocean recedes with every wave before it returns. The lungs exhale before they inhale. The heart rests between beats. Every oscillating system in nature, and you are an oscillating system, moves between states. The effort and the recovery are not in opposition. They are the two phases of the same motion. You cannot sustain the effort without the recovery. The recovery is not what happens when the effort fails. The recovery is what makes the next effort possible. The rest is not the interruption of the life. The rest is the other half of the life, without which the other half cannot continue to be what it is. There is something in genuine rest, real rest, not the guilty half-rest of the scrolling and the recycled worry. The deep, permitted stillness that arrives when you have truly let yourself be here. Something in that rest that produces things the working state cannot produce. Not insight always, though insight comes. Not creativity always, though creativity comes. Something harder to name. A kind of reset in the interior orientation. A return to the ground of yourself beneath all the doing. In genuine rest, the self that you are when no one is watching, when nothing is required, when the performance has been suspended, that self surfaces. It is quieter than the working self. It has different preoccupations. It is less interested in outcomes and more interested in what is actually happening, in you and around you, in the texture of the present moment rather than the anticipated future. It notices things the working self does not have time to notice. The specific quality of light through a window at a particular hour. The sound of rain doing what rain does, indifferent to your productivity, falling equally on everything. The thought that has been waiting patiently at the edge of your attention for days, needing the working mind to step aside before it could be heard. The feeling you have been carrying around without acknowledging, because acknowledging it would require slowing down, and you have not been slow enough. This quiet self has access to things the busy self does not. It can hear what you actually want, underneath what you think you are supposed to want. It can feel what is not working, clearly and without the defensive insistence of the self that has too much invested in the current path to examine it honestly. It can recognize, in the stillness, the things that have been asking for your attention from underneath the noise of everything else. And it can rest. It can simply be here, without an agenda, and find that being here without an agenda is not emptiness. It is the opposite of emptiness. It is fullness of a different kind, the kind that does not make noise. You cannot access this self while running. It is not available in the motion. It lives in the pauses. And when you allow yourself the stillness, genuinely and without guilt, the self that surfaces is often the more truthful one, the one that knows what you actually need, the one that is not performing for anyone, including yourself, the one that is simply here, alive and present and real, in a way the performing self is only sometimes permitted to be. This is what rest gives you, that sleep deprivation cannot buy. Not just the replenished biology, the restored access to yourself. The return, however brief, to the person underneath all the doing, the person who was there before the work began, and who will still be there when the work eventually is finished. That person deserves rest as much as the worker does, perhaps more, perhaps especially now, tonight, when the work is done and the dark is here, and everything is asking you to simply be. Consider what it might feel like to simply receive rest the way you receive other necessities. You do not feel guilty for breathing. You do not feel guilty for drinking water. These are simply requirements. The body asks, you give. There is no moral charge in either direction, no ledger to balance. The body needed something. You provided it. You move on. Rest is in this category. It is not a luxury. It is not a reward. It is not a deviation from the proper mode of existence. It is as basic as the breath. The body, after a day of effort, asks for restoration. It asks through tiredness and heaviness and the impulse to be still. And the answer to that asking does not require justification. It requires only that you say yes, the way you say yes to air, the way you say yes to water, simply, without ceremony, without making yourself earn it first. And if you find that difficult, if the old programming reasserts itself and the guilt arrives uninvited as you try to rest, you do not have to argue with it. You do not have to convince it that it is wrong. You can simply notice it, acknowledge that it is there, and rest anyway. The guilt does not require your agreement. It is an old voice saying an old thing. You can hear it without believing it. And beneath it, more patient and more quiet and more steady than the guilt has ever been, is the body asking. Just the body asking for what it has always asked for and always needed and has every right to receive. Letting go of guilt around rest is not a single act. It is a practice. It is the repeated, patient, sometimes difficult practice of choosing rest before you feel you have fully earned it, of lying down when the list is not finished, of sitting in the morning with the coffee before you check the phone, of saying no to the productive Sunday because your body and mind need the quiet Sunday instead. And it is noticing, each time you do this, what actually happens, which is not that everything falls apart, which is not that you fall behind in some permanent and irreversible way, which is not that you are revealed as lazy or insufficient than the people who did not rest. What actually happens is the rest, the ordinary, quiet miracle of a body and mind that were given permission to stop and used the permission well. The restoration that arrives not as a dramatic revelation, but as the quiet fact of waking tomorrow, feeling slightly more like yourself than you would have done otherwise. The work that is there waiting for you, and that you approach with slightly more presence than you would have approached it from depletion. The conversation that goes a little better because you arrived at it rested rather than depleted. The decision that is slightly clearer because the mind had the dark hours it needed to process and integrate and settle. The day that goes a little better than the days that come from nights of guilty non-rest, and the slow, accumulating discovery that the person who rests is not falling behind the person who does not. The person who rests is building something the person who does not cannot sustain, the capacity to keep going, which requires as its prerequisite the willingness to stop. You are allowed to rest tonight, not because you have finished everything. There is no version of this life in which everything is finished, not because you have earned it through sufficient output. The earning model is what we are releasing tonight, because you are here, and you are tired. The body is asking for what all living bodies need. At the end of a day, simply this: the dark, the quiet, the slow breath, the release of everything you have carried today. You are allowed to put it down. Rest now. Let all of it go quiet. The day has done what it could do. That is enough. You are not behind. You are not falling short. You are lying down at the end of a day. This is exactly what is supposed to happen. The body knows how to do this. Trust it. Your breath is slowing. Let it slow. Nothing is being lost while you rest. Everything that matters will be there tomorrow. Right now there is only this: the quiet, the dark, the weight of a body that carried you through another day, asking only this in return. You can give it this. You are allowed. The guilt is not yours to carry tonight. Set it down, right here. You have done enough today. You truly have. The list will wait. The inbox will wait. That version of you will be there in the morning. Right now, that version of you is resting. Rest is what it needs for tomorrow. There is no competition in sleep. No one is winning by staying awake. No one is falling behind by being here. Everyone who has ever lived has done this. They have lain down. They have let the day go. Tonight you are in that company. All of them. Every person who finished a day and gave it to the dark. You are allowed to be tired. You are allowed to need this. The needing is not weakness. The needing is being alive. Nothing is required of you in this dark. Not performance, not productivity, not the next version of yourself. Just the breathing, just the settling, just the ordinary miracle of a body giving itself over to rest. The breath is your anchor now. Just the breath, in and out. That is all. That is everything. You are doing it. You are resting. Right now. This is what it looks like. Your body is safe. Your nervous system can stand down. There is nothing to guard against in this dark. The night is on your side. It always has been. You are going there now. You can feel it. The edges of things are softening. The thoughts are losing their urgency. The body is heavy in the good way, the way of something held up all day, finally allowing itself to be set down. This is not wasted time. This is the most necessary time. This is the time that makes the rest possible. This is the night from which the day grows. This is the winter keeping tomorrow's seed. The quiet around you is kind. It is asking nothing. It is simply here, the way the night is simply here. And you are part of it now. The breathing and the dark and the stillness are all one thing. You belong in this. You have always belonged in this. Rest, without guilt, without apology, without the sense that you should be elsewhere, or doing something else, or being something else. You are here, in the dark, breathing, held, allowed. The night will keep you. The morning will find you. And between the two, this, rest, simply and completely and without apology. Rest. Sleep.